Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Planet Lean interview. Today, we'll be talking about the application of lean thinking in NGOs. A very warm welcome to our interviewee, Lynne Smith, former Director of Business Design at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's great to have you here, Lynne. Good morning.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you for your time. And welcome also to Steve Bell, Lean and Agile coach, author, and founder of leanagilengo.org. Steve is an expert and observer of the NGO world, and will help us make a sense of things as our conversation unfolds. Just a quick introduction from me. I mean, the work of NGOs is incredibly important, and the potential of applying lean, I think, to this environment is huge. We talked about this a little bit last year at the Lean Global Connection. Steve, you were part of the event. We had a lot of presentations around that topic, and it was great. We do believe that Lean can make the world a better place, which makes this union kind of like a great match, at least on paper, because I know there are some issues along the way, and we're going to be talking about those kind of hindering that the union that I just mentioned. But I would like to just get started maybe with Steve, since you, given your experience, I think it would be great for you to kind of get us started. And first of all, thank you for making this interview happen. You introduced me to Lynne, and it's great to have this conversation together today. So I would just ask you, Steve, maybe you can take us through the current state of lean in NGOs. What is that?
I'm happy to. And first of all, I do want to acknowledge, Roberto, this last year's Lean Global Connection event was tremendous. You had over a dozen events that in some way focused on things like climate change and hunger and agriculture, much more than in previous years. Lean has always had a focus on the commercial sector, but folks in the Lean global community are really turning their attention to this. And so that's why I'm especially excited to have Lynne here today. So just in brief, during my 30-year career working with Lean and Agile in the commercial environment mostly, I've seen Lean apply to virtually every industry on the planet. And while I've had several deeply satisfying experiences coaching with nonprofits and NGOs around the world, I discovered that in the large part, Lean is not widely adopted and not even well known in the NGO community. And because of this, then I formed Lean Agile NGO over 10 years ago. And I've had plenty of time to question why Lean hasn't penetrated into this most needy situation. So there's a lot of reasons, but what I really believe is one of the root causes is that donors, both private donors and institutional donors, are understandably concerned with not spending their money on what they would call wasteful overhead. They want their investments to go directly to the programs and produce the outcomes that make a difference. And this is understandable. And there are many controls and constraints built into program management and institutional funders, especially with the larger institutional funders, that prevent this from happening. But it's also sadly misguided. And clearly there are many ways that money can be wasted on administrative and operational activities. However, skillful investments in what are usually considered overhead, including staff capability development, process excellence, organizational problem solving, and multi-party collaborative program and operations management systems, are all essential for an NGO, large or small, to thrive and adapt to the rapid pace of change in today's world. This brings me to why I'm excited to have Lynne Smith here to speak with us today. She spent over 10 years at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the largest private foundation in the world, where she was brought in to lead a major effort to lean out the process for making and managing charitable investments. She built and led the business design team, which used the lean approach to improve operational processes, and more importantly, embedded lean thinking into the DNA of the organization. And I'm excited to hear Lynne share with us concrete examples of why it's important for everyone in the nonprofit world to clearly identify and invest in continuously improving value-adding activities of all kinds, including operational processes, administrative activities, management systems, and people development, while relentlessly driving out non-value adding activities, also known as waste of all kind. That's what lean practice is all about. And Lynne, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I am a firm believer that lean thinking can be a real driving force for positive change in the world. So thrilled to be able to have a conversation about it.
Great. Thank you, Steve, for that introduction. And Lynn, once again, thanks for being here. I wanted to ask you, before we dive deep into the actual conversation, can you take us through your background? Because I think you learned lean in the private sector, I believe, before you actually moved on to the NGO world. So would you take us through your background briefly, please?
Sure. I actually started my career in finance, principally with investment firms. So a very different type of environment than we're talking about today. But the common thread was I started working with smaller organizations that were experiencing rapid growth. And as you know, what gets you there will not take you ahead. And so in every role that I had, I was always needing to look for how do we scale this operation? How do we adopt and adapt what we're doing in a different way so that we can continue to grow sustainably? And did that over and over. And after a few different roles in a few different places, I found the firm that I was with was acquired by Johnson Controls, which is a large global manufacturing organization. So very different type of org than I had been with before. And I used that opportunity to satisfy my own intellectual curiosity and get some more formal training in what I was doing on my own. And so I had the opportunity to formally learn lean and become a Six Sigma Master Black Belt in a manufacturing environment. And it was really quite interesting. I was the first person there to actually study this way of thinking and applying it to transactional, or i.e. human processes versus a manufacturing process. And it was eye-opening for the folks in manufacturing to see how this applies, and how in some cases, when you talk about waste, one of the biggest wastes of all is wasting time from really smart people with great ideas. We want people to be spending their time innovating, collaborating, and executing, and not on doing day-to-day work that could be done in a more efficient way. So from there, I ended up jumping over to Jones Lang LaSalle, a global real estate firm, who at the same time was embedding lean thinking into their construction practices and seeing phenomenal results. And they were exploring, how might we apply lean into other areas of our business? So I came in and led the work to embed lean practices into portfolio management and for corporate real estate work. So everything from acquisitions, lease administration, moves, adds, changes, all the kinds of things that companies need to do with their physical presence. And it was a very successful set of services that we offered, so much so that our clients, who are Fortune 500 companies themselves, would often say, hey, you helped us in this area. Do you think you could help us in this other area? And that opened the door for my team and I to work on leaning out processes in pharmaceutical industry, healthcare, hospital systems, retail, telecommunications, media, you name it. Because once someone is exposed to the power of lean thinking, it opens their mind to, wow, we could use this in lots of different ways. So while I was doing that, I happened to be introduced to someone who was working at the Gates Foundation, and said, oh, the Gates Foundation had just recently gotten quite a lot bigger, and that this was when Warren Buffett had added his generous donations to the corpus, and the foundation was growing quite a bit, and said, oh, there's an effort there to use lean to kind of make the grant making more efficient. Would you please speak with them? So it started out with a set of conversations with the woman leading the work. And through those conversations, they realized that this is not a project, right? Using lean to improve something, while it can be scoped as a project, the best way to use it is to make it part of how an organization does its work. And that means you need a permanent team, and it doesn't have to be a big one. And you have to have kind of a long runway to think about embedding a different way of working. And so I was brought on to do first the project portion of it, which was there was a set of processes that needed to be leaned out, but then also establishing the business design team to work across a whole host of operational processes. And I'm really, really proud because the work that we did, the initial work we did to lean out the grant making process received the Global Best Practice Award from the Institute of Industrial and Systems Engineers for innovative application of lean. And it was the first time, and this was about 10 years ago, this was the first time that a philanthropic organization had even been up for consideration. And it really allowed for some great conversations amongst our local community here in Seattle and elsewhere on, you know, what are some ways that we all can use lean thinking to make our work better? And as you said, Roberto, I mean, the opportunity to apply lean in the philanthropic sector and the value that could be delivered to the world is tremendous.
That's right. Thank you very much. I mean, such an interesting background, so diverse. This actually leads me to ask this next question. What are your observations based on your experience around the differences that exist, you know, when it comes to applying lean to a for-profit organization versus a not-for-profit organization? And when it comes to kind of leading that change, how do you translate those principles, which we know are universal, but how do you translate them? They often need to be communicated in a slightly different way. I don't know if that was your experience too.
Yeah, actually, I think the biggest challenge for any environment, for-profit, nonprofit, is meeting people where they are in the vocabulary. So in the for-profit world or whatever industry sector you're working in, there's a certain vocabulary. And if someone comes in and uses a different language, it's difficult to get the traction to do the collaborative work that is critical to lean, you know, approaches and to applying lean methodologies. So I think language is a big one. And one of the ways that, and I saw this in the for-profit world even, the words that you use for a media company are very different than the words you use in a hospital system. So the lean practitioner needs to sort of learn enough of the language so that, as I always say, you need to be conversant, not necessarily fluent, but definitely conversant in the languages of the sectors in which you're going to be working. And philanthropy has its own language as well. So I think that's one really, really important aspect to bringing it in. What I found is the same is, you know, people are the same. Change is hard for people. And I think sometimes the stakes seem a little bit higher in the nonprofit world, right? You know that the resources are so constrained, the challenges are huge, and you know the implications are big. And so no one wants to make a mistake, and no one wants to go down a path that's not going to yield results. And so there's always a little bit of this reticence to adopt a new way of working. So in addition to sort of learning the language, I've always found, you know, start small and build on it, which again aligns really, really well with lean principles. You know, solve a small issue for someone and then build on that and go more and more. And a great example, one of the activities that I used to do with my team at the Gates Foundation is we had a wonderful partnership with the Jefferson County Community Foundation here in Washington. And the reason why is because there are a couple of individuals who are on that board who in their professional lives were lean practitioners. And they had started offering free classes and workshops on lean thinking to the nonprofits in that community. So we partnered up with them, and we would offer a one-day workshop once a year to all of these different nonprofits. And some of them were very, very small. Some were the local branches of big international organizations like Habitat for Humanity. And we always invited people to come in with, bring a challenge that you're working on. And what we found every year is we could, for some groups, if it was a small challenge, we could guide them through and fix that problem that day. With other groups, It was enlightening them on, have you really identified the problem? Maybe what you're talking about is a symptom of a root cause problem that you haven't yet articulated. And so, all of the basics around lean, we were able to get through, and the results were tremendous. One of the proudest moments is when we heard from an organization that provided assistance to women experiencing domestic violence. And by helping them lean out their intake process, they were able to reduce the time that it took from once a woman called their hotline to getting into a safe place, was reduced from a week to a couple of hours. That's the kind of thing that literally saves lives. And so it's really meeting people where you are, and allowing people to gain some confidence. As you and Steve and I know, it's not that hard, but it's called the lean practice for a reason. You do have to practice it to get really good at it. And practice gives people confidence, and having a coach or a guide of some sort to help you through is a way to maybe get you to that area of confidence and proficiency a little bit faster, and perhaps overcome some of those objections of, gosh, I don't know that I want to invest money in this when I don't exactly know what the return's going to be.
That's great. Thank you. Are there any other sort of like challenges? You mentioned, for example, the vocabulary you use when it comes to communicating, like something specific to the world of NGOs that you found in the 10 years that you led the implementation of Lean at the Gates Foundation. What were the key things that you observed that like kind of were hurdles along the way that you had to overcome? And then from here, we're going to move on to actually knowing about the journey, the Lean journey there at the foundation.
Yeah, I think, one of the other challenges is that in the nonprofit world, philanthropic world, you have folks who are subject matter experts in a specific area, and just not really, and then being put into a different environment. So if you are an expert in, research and development, and you've worked in academic institutions all your life, you just have not been exposed to working within a different kinds of organizational structure. And so there is a huge learning curve when you bring people from different environments into the philanthropic world, tell them that it is different. And there are even some areas, as we all know, there's we're always looking to eliminate waste. And sometimes there are different processes that are imposed by governments or a regulatory environment that may not be adding value to the ultimate beneficiary, but it's the cost of doing business. And so getting people to kind of understand, we need to parse out, needed complexity from unnecessary complexity. And this often involves people needing to learn what comes upstream from your work and where does it go downstream. And as you know, that takes time. And that's the most valuable resource of all. And for people to invest that time to learn where their work fits into a full system is an investment that needs to be made. And it's hard. It's hard to find time from people who are passionate about the philanthropic work that they're doing.
Yeah. Lynn, I'd like to ask a follow-up question on that, if I may. And having seen this happen countless times in the for-profit world, leadership might hire a consulting organization to come in, and they may or may not know the industry, they may or may not know the company, but there's the general fear, and often it's what happens is this consulting firm comes in and they tell people what to do, and they write manuals, and people are supposed to follow the rules. Very disempowering. Whatever, fiefdoms or tribal organizations within the company are there often rise up and compete with the end. It just can become a mess. And I think a lot of people who hear lean in terms of eliminating waste and efficiency and speed and quality may think that a lean coach is going to come in and do something to us. Can you help us understand from the perspective of the folks at the Gates Foundation how it's different? How is it different for them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, when I came in, I think prior to my tenure at the foundation, that had been the experience. at the foundation, where there's an improvement that needed. And a lot of times it's framed up in like, we need to implement a new system, a new finance system, or something. And so you bring in consultants, and it's back to people and change management. There's a healthy skepticism. The consultants oftentimes don't really understand the business, and if the appropriate stakeholder engagement is not done, what you want a consultant to do is to help guide an organization, not do the work for the organization. And in fact, when I had my initial conversations with my contact at the foundation, that was the advice that I gave. And this was before I was, they had a job. I was even, considering moving over. And I said, this kind of work cannot be led by a consultant. You have to have your own team. There needs to be a designated leader for this. And it can't be something that this person does off the side of their desk. It's this type of change is too big. So you don't need a huge team, but you do need a team, and you need people that are going to be there, because designing a change is one thing. Then you have to implement it. Then you have to sustain it. And then you have to continuously improve it and adapt it to changing circumstances. That's not a project. That's a way of working. And so I am a very strong proponent that the best way to use lean consultants is to help you set up your organization and your way of working, and to provide that coaching. So that it's a really, really good point. And again, have seen this for-profits, nonprofits, all across the board. But as you said, it's tougher for nonprofits to say yes to that investment. But I underscore, it's an investment, and investments that have positive returns are the ones you want to make.
Thank you, Lynne. You started talking about your experience at the Gates Foundation. I wonder if perhaps before we delve any deeper into the actual journey, can you introduce the foundation to people who may not know about it, and what makes it unique in the NGO world? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the world's largest private foundation. Its purpose is to provide funding out in the world to solve some of the world's biggest problems. And what really makes it unique is the sheer scale of it. When I joined the foundation, the annual payout was $3.9 billion. That's with a B, which was multiples larger than the next largest foundations, Ford, Rockefeller, et cetera. So it is many, many times larger than those very large organizations. Last year, I left in July. In 2023, the payout was nearly $9 billion. So it is very, very large. But the scale is not just in terms of numbers, it's also the sheer breadth of activities. So the foundation has 40-ish discrete programs in global health, global development, in the US programs. It's everything from developing vaccines, very early stage R&D research, to agricultural innovations in other parts of the world, to early childhood education. And so those are all very, very different types of work, and people come from all kinds of backgrounds. So I would say the third really big difference versus some other organizations is the wonderful diversity of professionals that are there. It's people from all kinds of industries, from all over the world. So as that makes it, when you're looking to lean things out, when you talk about standardization, that's not really possible to standardize across something that's so big and so different. But we looked for those opportunities of what can be done more similarly than not across these different programs. So it's about nearly 2,000 employees spread out all over the world, headquartered here in Seattle, where I live. But folks are all over the world, working across time zones and industries and languages.
It sounds like a tall order when you got on board with the foundation. How did you approach the implementation of Lean? How can you take us through that journey? Like, how did it start? What was the main problem that they wanted to solve? How did it evolve over time?
Yeah, well, fortunately for me, they had done some great work before I even got on board to identify the problem. It was probably one of the most beautiful spaghetti diagrams I had ever seen, was put together. And it really was taking a look at like a core business process, which is how does the charitable investment get out the door? So many people think of grants, but there are also other investment vehicles used. So we call them charitable investments. And the presenting problems where, one, it was taking longer than people wanted. There was rework, oftentimes done late in the game. And three, it was unclear whose input was needed and whose decision was needed when. So a little lack of clarity around the decision-making process. And so obviously, from an internal perspective, that's inefficient, right? We know we can be more efficient with our resources if we have a more leaned out process. But actually, the bigger problem was on the grantee side, because as the foundation had grown and kept adding programs and was doing so many different things, sometimes there would be a grantee who was working with more than one program within the foundation, and the process was a little bit different each time. So you can imagine how confusing and frustrating it would be to the very people that we're trying to help if the process is not efficient and it's confusing. So that was really the presenting problem. And so when I joined in, it was just at the very beginning of design, and a couple things that were done that I think are best practices when you're going to be doing something like this is, one, start small. So we were not trying to do something that was going to work across the entire foundation. We had 4 teams, one from four different programmatic areas, and we had people from each of those teams co-designing with us. So it was very much of my role, my team's role was to facilitate the work of the foundation. And we even in our words, like, this is designed by all of those, you have to be very humble in this work and not take any credit for anything that's good, and you assume all of the blame for anything that goes sideways, just like any good leader would. So we had the subset and co-design, and there's a lot of stakeholder management, right? And a lot of change management. And I would say the change management was on 2 fronts. One was on the folks designing and experiencing the change, because getting used to doing work in a different way is hard. And also realizing, oh, what's maybe optimal for me won't work for the rest of the foundation, so I'm going to have to kind of give up a little something there. That's all, standard change management. But also for my team doing the work, it's really hard to lead other people through change. When people get frustrated, they don't always show up as their best selves. And in order to use the time most effectively of our colleagues doing work, we spend a lot of time preparing, a lot of hours, and it does take a toll on people. And so keeping my team up and letting them go through the same kind of change curve, like, we had a really good workshop, and then it's like, okay, we took a few steps backwards for something came. It's okay. We'll get through this. We'll get back up again. So, it's that was also part of the learning for my team, and some of whom I hired and brought in with me, who already had lean experience, and the others were sort of trained as they were doing the work, as were our colleagues. So learn as you go and learn by doing. So those were sort of 2 of the challenges that we had in doing this. And then the next was, once we actually had an initial design, being very upfront about it's imperfect, it's good enough. And I think that was the biggest challenge for me at the foundation, because we have an organization of highly, highly skilled professionals, and good enough just doesn't feel good. There's a higher bar for absolutely everything that they did, and we're saying, well, it's good enough to get it started, and then we will improve as we go once we actually know. And by having some good data, that actually took the temperature down, because it's a very data-driven organization, and people who have that kind of mindset and saying, we're going to do this and we're going to see, and if it works, we'll scale it, and if it doesn't, we'll adjust it, and then scale it, redesign and scale. So that was a way to kind of bring people along. But at the end of the day, sort of we have to earn our stripes by actually delivering what we promised to deliver. And so sometimes patience is the other ingredient that's needed in work like this.
Absolutely. Can you perhaps take us through some of the, or give us a couple of examples of the changes that were implemented, perhaps the ones that you're most proud of, and what results they led to?
Yeah. So the initial work that we were doing to lean out, it was really interesting because we couldn't touch any of the technology systems that were in place, and they were old and functionally obsolete, not built to scale, but there were so many other things that had to be sequenced first. So there's also an HR system, a finance system, all of those things were being put in. So what we did was we kind of leaned out as best we could with the constraint that we had, which is we have this system that we're living with. So what we really focused on was the front end and getting alignment. And so just, very simple things, just by putting in, a decision gate that was very clear and very objective. This is go, no go, like everything up to here, this is what you do. And here's a little sandbox where you can keep your information. And then at this point, and had clearly identified who gets to make the decision. So that was a real win. And again, it's interesting because people develop certain patterns. And there are a lot of people, it's like, oh, I'm the decision maker, but I don't really want to make the decision until these 3 other people make the decision. And getting people, along like, that's not necessary. That is not necessary. And getting very clear on inputs and outputs. What inputs do you need to make your decision? And then that was what we really standardized, or like that we all agree. These are the 3 or 4 things that you need, 3 or 4 inputs that you need, and then you can make a quality decision and then move on from there. So having that clarity really, really helped. So that was a big win. Probably the biggest win was after we had this initial new process put in. Well, one, we got great feedback from grantees. Like they loved it. It was very clear, it was a lot more transparency for them. So that was a win. But we had this gap in time. We had about a year between when we put in this initial new process and when we could actually really lean it out with the benefit of modern technology platform. So we used that year to run a prototype program. And we looked at a whole host of changes, and we just ran it with a few teams. And a lot of things were, done manually, like we weren't working in any kind of systems. We were just really testing different ways of working. And we said, this is our chance to be bold. Just a couple of teams, low dollar investment. It's a year max. Let's be bold. So we boldly said, what would it take for a program officer at the Gates Foundation to make a grant without anyone else having to look at it? What could that, is that possible? What would it take to do that? So what we ended up those workshops were very stimulating because we debunked a lot of myths that our own folks had. People were like, oh, well, legal absolutely has to review this. And then someone from legal would say, actually, no, we don't need to look at that. And someone would say, well, no, finance needs to approve this. And someone from finance would say, no, we're okay. We trust that at, below a certain dollar, you're good. So we created what we called straightforward investments. And a program officer could make it. And really the only check was the tax ID, that, making sure that the organization was a qualified organization. And it took 76% of the volume out of the system into this very much leaner, super quick process. And yet it represented less than 20% of our payout. So, so that was really big. So really underscoring to folks, it's like and while it might look like the value was, oh, we got this money out faster, like it's better for grantees. It didn't waste a lot of time internally. The big win on this is we just freed up time for the other 80% of our payout, which represents for any one person 1 or 2 big things a year. And we're like, that's what we want you to do. So that was a huge win, and really happy to say that it was expanded. Like even what we went out with initially, we were able to like, what else could we scoop in here into this, super fast process? And it was great. And we also kept an eye on unintended consequences, because what we didn't want to do was say, oh, one of the ways is if you've already done a grant with us, like we've already done due diligence and that goes through. We were very, very cognizant that we didn't want to create an incentive that actually works against what we're trying to get at. We're always looking for new and smaller grantees that are working out into the world. And so that was something that we kept an eye on.
That's great. And I love that there was a focus on also making the work easier for the people, in the everyday, in their everyday jobs, which is, I think, one of the most important contributions that Lynne can give. And, this kind of leads me to the next question, which is how did people absorb this, and how did they react to this different way of working?
Actually, very well. Once everyone had gone through it once, there was like, oh, this is better. And as you just said, freeing up people's time is hugely valuable. And I would say that the other value that it delivered was it truly brought the joy back to work for people. Because when people can spend the time on what they passionately care about, that brings joy to work. And it actually changes the culture of an organization. So that was really, the best. I think it also demonstrated that, we can do continuous improvement. So if something comes out and it's not quite working for you, or it's not quite, rest assured that we have a team that's looking at this, and we will make things better if they're not optimal for you right now. I think there was that skepticism based on the past where consultants would come in, do something, and then leave, right? And then if it wasn't working, you're kind of stuck because no one left there to do it. And that's why, I'm a proponent that these are not projects, these are ways of working, and they need a team to steward it and to make sure that it's embedded in with folks. The other, I would say this is like evidence of how well this had worked, was when I came to the foundation, I had my lean vocabulary. I met people where they were, but, I would start using certain terminology and slipping it in like over time. And, I don't know, there was really one day I remember walking around at the foundation and you hear people talking about voice of the customer and, or plan, do, check, act. And you're like, this is taking hold. People are actually using this. And then the other piece of evidence was that other operational teams were actually putting in lean capabilities into desired capabilities for job descriptions. And that's a wonderful way to embed lean thinking in an organization, is just start buying folks that have that mindset. And you don't have to set up a big expensive initiative. You can organically grow something with the right people.
Thank you. It sounds like very, very impressive work. One thing that I think is super important that we mentioned in this interview, there is something that Steve brought to my attention. I wasn't aware of that. The overhead paradox. He hinted to it during his introduction. Basically, you have a situation where NGOs kind of feel a pressure where they have to kind of limit the spending that is not directly related to programs. And this, of course, hinders their ability to invest in important things like, I guess, even continuous improvement, but, education. You talked about, technology, at the Gates Foundation when you first started being not as up to, not state of the art, let's say. But I understand that the Gates Foundation was a kind of a unique environment, of course, self-funded, so different. But I wonder if there are any tips that you can share that might help other NGOs that feel that constraint of the overhead costs.
Yeah, it's you know, it's a shame. If I had one wish, it would be that funders just give unrestricted funding and let people, do the work. It's just like even with a small nonprofit, nobody wants to write a check to pay for the electricity. They want to pay for the building or the fancy program. So, if I could figure out how to change that mindset, that would be wonderful. But yeah, it is any of these things that are not considered core to the program. It's very tough. So I would suggest that where possible, design lean capability building into the program design itself, and to have it be part of one of these programs, as opposed to trying to bring it into the organization overall. It's a very hard sell. And again, try it as almost like an experiment, like, hey, we're going to try this program in a slightly different way by adding this element to it. And I'm pretty sure that if you were then to do some evaluation and evaluate that program against a program that didn't have that, you would see the positive difference, and you would start building the case for why this should be included in every program. And then it's just sort of the next logical thing is, oh, if we're doing this across our programs, maybe we should have that capability that can be as a shared service across all of the work that we do. So that's one. The second is, it's hard to hire people in the nonprofit world, right? It's hard to hire good people anywhere, but particularly in the nonprofit world, where, as we know, the compensation can't compete with for-profit. You don't get equity. You're always at risk of, funding. So your job security is a little less so. I actually think that by offering this capability building as a benefit, that you can attract people that you might not otherwise attract to your organization, because you're giving them a skill and a capability that's very marketable, and it kind of offsets the risk that's inherent with jumping to a nonprofit or an NGO. So I feel like it's every bit as valuable as other benefits that are provided.
Lynn, if I can follow that up, I know we're running short on time here, but way back in the early origins of lean in the 1950s in the quality world, someone made the comment, quality is free. And what of course they meant is, if you invested in quality and built quality throughout the organization, you would get your money back. And I firmly believe that's true. A lot of people hear that and go, well, where's my return on investment? I invested in a quality program a month ago. Where's my return? It's not easy. It's not fast, and you need to be consistent. And like you said, it's more of not so much a project as a mindset, as a culture. But if an NGO that barely has enough funding to get by in the first place needs to add one more thing on the list, can you offer, speaking to the smaller organizations now, just to get it going, you use the term pilot, how do you get something like this going on a small enough scale so that you build that kind of internal trust and confidence to help it move forward?
Yeah, I am going back to the example that I gave with Jefferson County, like start with a one-day workshop, right? I'm pretty sure every organization can afford one day. Every organization has times where they bring their folks together. And I think it's a great idea. Spend, or even a half a day, learn a few basics, bring a problem, with you, a challenge with you, and see how this thinking can help you break through the challenges that you're experiencing. So I think there's a very low dollar threshold for being able just to introduce people to this concept. And again, just start small and build on from there. Reach out. There's lots of resources. And I know you can share some with the listeners, that resources for people to explore on their own. And, many cities have organizations where folks can come together for learning, and these are all free. And just, take that first step. One thing about folks in the philanthropic world is that they're not afraid of hard problems. And so I said, take that first step, take that risk, and try thinking about something in a different way. And you may be surprised by the amazing results you get.
That's great. We only have a couple of minutes left. I wonder, Steve, is there anything else that you would like to ask Lynne? And if not, maybe you can help us wrap up this conversation. What were your key takeaways from all the very interesting things that Lynne told us today?
Where do I start? First of all, I don't want to say much because if there's any time that Lynne has for one more story, I think it's the stories that change people's minds more than anything else. But Lynne, I just want to thank you because your ability to so concisely articulate your journey, but in a way that I think everyone out there can understand is just invaluable. So thank you. So your time and your effort in this is appreciated. So if you have one story to close this out, I'm all ears.
Well, I think the one story is hearing from grantees. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Sometimes we all get wrapped up in our own, making business cases and trying to get the resources for the team and like all of those things. But at the end of the day, hearing from a grantee, like, this was great, thank you. Like this, I was able to, this grant moved more quickly. I was able to get the money out in a more timely way. Those are the stories. And so it's always remembering, like, who are we really working for out there, and what are we really, why are we here? And it connects with me, Lynne connects with me on a values basis. And so that to me is just sort of the best evidence, is when you have someone come up to you and just say, thanks for making this easier. I think that's great. I'm so proud of the work that we did at the foundation and the work that my team continues to do there. And I would love it if more and more philanthropic organizations would embrace this mindset. And I thank the two of you and the organizations that support lean practitioners.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are out of time. I want to thank once again Lynne for her invaluable insights today and, of course, her time. Great to meet you and hear all of your stories. Thank you so much, Steve, for your input, very valuable, and your experience. I would like to thank you both, and I'm sure it's not the last time that we talk. And thank you, everybody, for watching.